Well done! You've reached the end of this module on React components. Module 1 gave you an overview of the basic structure and use of React.js. The purpose was to enable you to produce single-page applications with React. Let's take a tour of the lessons to determine how it did just that. First, you learned about how React is used in the real world from Meta software engineer Katie. Then, to lay the foundation for the hand-on labs, you had a quick summary of the fundamentals of HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. And then you learned how to set up a project in VS Code and how to work with JavaScript modules. The second lesson was all about React components and where they're stored within your applications. In this lesson, you were introduced to component-based architecture, a design philosophy for building software based on reusable components of code, like the React library. You learned about component types and component-style layouts that use the virtual DOM. And you learned how to create components that form the foundation of UI design. In this lesson, you also learned more about JSX, a special kind of syntax that acts like an extension of JavaScript. You learned how to transpile it, in other words, convert JSX to HTML, which helped you to understand how a component is built. And in the Ungraded labs, you learned how to build a new component inside the app component and have it rendered on screen, as well as how to save a component to its own file and importing it into its parent component so that it can be rendered on screen. The third lesson was about component use and styling. You learned how to pass data from one component to another using properties, and your ability to do so was tested in the Ungraded lab. And in the other Ungraded lab, you learned how to render one component multiple times using different props. You also learned more about how to use JSX and its embedded expressions and how to style JSX elements in a way that is functional and looks good. As part of this lesson, you learned how to use and manipulate props and components, define components using function expressions and arrow functions, invoke functions inside of JSX expressions, use expressions as props, declare components that require props, and use expressions and embedded expressions in attributes. After completing this module, you are now able to explain the concepts behind React and component architecture, create a component to serve a specific purpose, create a component folder and demonstrate how to create and import files within that folder, use and manipulate props and components to affect visual results, and describe how to use assets within an app to apply styling and functional components. That's a great start to your React journey. Well done on completing this module, and get ready for the next one.